There's the last.
Yeah.
Good, good, good. Well, welcome back to the Cranmer Fellows podcast. I'm Jonathan Groves. I'm the assistant director at Church of the Good Shepherd in Binghamton, New York. And I'm here with my co-host, Matt Kennedy, rector of Church of the Good Shepherd and canon for preaching in the Anglican Diocese of the Living Word. Today, we're going to discuss supposed inconsistencies in the Gospels. So it should be fun. Matt, how are you doing?
Very good. How about yourself?
Doing all right? Doing all right. Matt, how many times as a pastor have you been asked about how many women and angels are at the tomb?
That's been a big, that one's one of the more common ones. Why,
Yeah,
why does Mark have one angel and John have two? But the basic question is, how do you explain the contradictions in the Bible? And
right. Yeah,
very often when someone asks you that and you say, okay, which contradictions? They can't contradictions. They don't
exactly.
know.
Yeah, it's definitely something that if you're a Christian, you've heard
Yeah.
before. Well, what about all the contradictions in the Bible? And I think that's a good. The follow up question is, okay, well, what contradictions are you talking about? And I mean, a lot of the times people don't actually know, but then there are the alleged contradictions. But maybe before we dive into a few of them, uh, perhaps we should define our terms, because when I hear of a contradiction, I think of like a formal contradiction, like A equals B.
Right.
No, that would be a contradiction, or a married bachelor, right? It's like that's a contradiction. And so when it comes to alleged contradictions in the Bible, uh, that I, that would I think most of the time people mean probably more of like an inconsistency, something that seems to not follow.
Right.
Right, but like, how many actual contradictions are there? I mean, I think you and I would agree, are going to agree that there are none, because a contradiction would say, well, in the text is saying two different things that can't be the same, right? And so I hope to maybe look at a couple of those. Maybe one of them uh, would be an alleged contradiction. I don't think it is, but the others might be inconsistencies, things that don't seem to make sense or follow, but maybe we can think through them. So that sound okay?
Yeah, and there's some people get confused between that and paradoxes too. Uh, the Bible talks about God's sovereignty over the human heart, but it also talks about human beings making free choices. So it holds human beings responsible for free choices, and so for some people that's a contradiction when actually it's a paradox. We can't we To say you can't reconcile exactly how something fits together doesn't mean it won't ever fit together or that it can't fit together. It just means that we can't at this point figure out how it does.
Kind of like how God can be both just and merciful.
Yes, right, right. And I mean, we've talked about this last week. Heresy always enters in when we decide to resolve one side of the paradox by cutting out the other side. So,
Right. Yeah. There you go. Well, this should be fun. Let's dive into some. We're going to look at some alleged inconsistencies and contradictions uh, in the Gospels. Uh, we'll pare it down to those. And I'd like to start with Mark 2:23. So I guess what I'll do here is I'll read the text, explain the so-called inconsistency, and you have the fun job of figuring it out for us. Sound okay?
sounds great.
Good. So in Mark 2, starting in verse 23, there's one Sabbath Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. Now, leaving aside um, Jesus's point, which is a whole other conversation, I want to hone in on what the priest that Jesus says. He says, in the time of Abiathar the high priest. And here's where the alleged contradiction comes into play. If you go back to 1 Samuel 21, this is the story he's referring to. It says, Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David, trembling, and said to him, Why are you alone and no one with you? And David said to Ahimelech the priest, The king has charged me with the matter, and said to me, Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you, and with which I have charged you. I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. He goes on, and Ahimelech brings out bread, the bread that Jesus refers to. I guess you could say there's two kind of contradictions here. Abiathar isn't the priest in 1 Samuel 21, and it doesn't seem like David goes into the temple or the house of God that Jesus says he did. It seems like the priest comes out to him and brings the bread. So maybe let's start with the priest. Why does Jesus just not know his history? His he just must not
Yeah,
know his Bible, right?
yeah. He's he's got a little fact. He gets facts wrong, but he's yeah no.
Well,
He's
the disciple who wrote this
he
down.
was close. He was close. He was good.
Yeah,
Good.
that's super close. He got the first letter right.
Right, right,
It was an A. A priest with
right.
an A.
Well, I mean, as you know, Ahimelech is Abiathar's dad, and Abiathar was the sole remaining uh, son or a person able to be the high priest after Saul murders Ahimelech and everybody else for helping David. Uh,
Right.
he has Doeg, his this guy who's there, the pagan person who's there and sees it all go down. He has Doeg um, murder all the high priests, and Abiathar is the one who survives, and he goes to David, and he becomes the high priest under David. And there's a number of ways, a number of things that Jesus would be saying here, and probably there's a combination of all of them here. One is that it's pretty common for when you're talking about an era or a time to refer to the most prominent person of the time. So Abiathar was the more prominent high priest. He was alive during the time of Ahimelech, and he was actually serving in the temple, the tabernacle complex during the time his father was serving. So it is during the time of Abiathar the high priest this took place. It's during his ministry, although he wasn't yet technically the high priest. His high priesthood being taking precedent or preeminence over Ahimelech. It would make sense for a Jewish person to point to Abiathar. It's not that wouldn't be something that anyone uh, would critique him for making a mistake. And in fact, if the Pharisees to whom he's speaking had noticed an error in his biblical citation, they would have said, "Oh, you don't even know your Bible," right? But they don't. Um, so so it could be it's the naming the most prominent person fulfilling that office. Um, it could be that he's just referring to the fact that it did happen during Abiathar's time. I mean, it
Right.
was during his lifetime, during his ministry. Although again, he wasn't made high priest. And I kind of think it's a combination of those two things. It was during the time of Abiathar, who was later made the high priest. And there's really no contradiction there.
Right. I've heard that Abiathar would have been considered, well, more of a prominent character, like you said, than Ahimelech. But also, when you read uh, his story arc with David, he's much more of uh, a character that embodies um, the religious fervor that the Pharisees would be all about. They would really look up to Abiathar, and then you have, and if that's true, then Jesus using him. is actually really really smart because the point that he's making is, I mean, he's
Yeah.
pointing out their the inconsistency in their making their traditions uh, m- more of God's law than God's law is.
Right.
uh,
Right.
and then here's Abiathar, a hero of theirs, who was there, in the text suggests that approved of what
Right.
his father did. So his he backed it morally.
Using their hero to show that Jesus is just keeping the precedents going. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the yeah in the time of is really important. That even in the text itself, he's not, might be getting a little in the weeds, but he's in the text itself. He's not necessarily saying he was the priest, the high
Right.
priest. It's in the time of him,
Yeah.
which is how I guess you dog. It was a point um, that I would want to make again later when we talk about um, why or talk about these more generally here. But the interesting thing here is like this is a, an alleged inconsistency or contradiction, and a lot of the times when people look at this as a contradiction, they'll look at it on its face value or just say, "Oh, okay, that's not actually who the priest was," and they'll want to strip it from its historical context, forgetting that um, this is Jesus talking to people who uh, this history of theirs is much more like of an embodied history. I mean, it's the air they breathe. It's within their culture. There are going to be ways of talking about these stories that we don't have anymore. Like we don't talk this way. So when you get down into the context, you realize, well, uh, perhaps there are ways that sayings and ways of talking about these things that they just would have understood that we don't anymore because we're so
Yeah.
far removed.
That's super important because we carry into the scriptures our own way of communication, and our own kind of Western post Enlightenment way of thinking about sequence, um, order, categorization. The way we categorize things in our mind is not necessarily the way that people in the first century and the first century Near East categorize things in their minds. In fact, it's often very different. And so you have to do the work of trying to understand the culture and the way people communicated back then before you can say, "Oh, this is a contradiction," because of the communication style. I was trying to think of, as you were talking, of something, a similar thing in the way we talk, that someone from another culture might hear it and say, that's not true. You're not being accurate. And I'm something will come to my head.
It'll come up. Well, what about the part of going into the temple? Going into the temple, taking the showbread, versus in First Samuel, Ahimelech coming out to David. What's going on there?
Says that he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest. The I mean, I guess you have to know the temple or the tabernacle geography, don't you? Because you have the outer court, which would be considered being inside the tabernacle, the house of God. You could, anybody could go in there. You didn't have to be, well, any male could go in there. You didn't have to be a priest to go into the outer court. Um, but then there's the holy place, which is inside the tent, and then the most holy place, which is only where the high priest can go, and on the one time a year. And it's in the holy place, which is inside the tent, which is where the bread of the presence is kept. And so what seems to have happened is that David came into the court of the temple or tabernacle, but not into the holy place. Ahimelech went back into the holy place, brought bread out. Um, so both can be true. He went into the tabernacle, but yet he didn't go into the place that Abiathar went to, or
Right.
Ahimelech went to.
And Jesus's point here is not that he entered the house of God. That's not the
Yeah, yeah,
point. His point is that he ate the bread. So it's
Is it?
not it's not that, oh well, he had to go into the holy place. No, he ate the bread that's only for priests. That's the main point that he's making there, it seems. Okay, well, that one is done. Clearly, no problems. Anyone should have any problems with that one ever again. Let's uh,
Huh.
let's move on to another one. Judas. There are two accounts of Judas's death at the end of Matthew, at the beginning of Acts. Let me read both of them for us, starting in the Matthew passage. This is Matthew 27. Um, when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind, brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what has been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom the price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. Okay, so that's Matthew. I have Judas bringing back the money, uh, throwing the money back into the temple, and then the chief priests and elders taking that money and saying that this is blood money, and therefore they bought a field, and it was called a field of blood. It seems to be because of it being blood money. At least that seems to be what that text is saying. Then you get to Acts chapter 1, and this is in the context of the apostles choosing another apostle to take Judas's place. And Peter stands up and he starts talking in Acts 1, verse 16. Brothers, the scripture had to be fulfilled, which the Holy Spirit spoke beforehand by the mouth of David concerning Judas. It became a guide to those who arrested Jesus, for he was numbered among us and was allotted his share in this ministry. Then you have in parentheses, and we don't know if whether, this is Peter's still talking, probably Luke adding this in here. But in verse 18, he says, now this man acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness. And falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. And it became known to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the field was called in their own language, Al-Qadama, as field of blood. All right. So we have a number of inconsistencies here, it seems. First off, Luke says this man acquired the field with the reward of his wickedness. Seems to suggest the money, but we know from Matthew that was the chief priests. They did it. It was called the field of blood because of its blood money, but here it seems to suggest his death, which sounds different than hanging. That his bowels gushed out. So a lot to work with here, Matt. Where do you start?
Well, I mean, I think you start first with the idea of the buying of the field. I think we can say, because Matthew's account is pretty detailed about this, that they took the money and they bought this field with the money, the blood money. Um, but so how can you reconcile that with Acts saying, or Luke saying that Judas bought it? Well, in in the sense of Judas, they're using Judas's money to buy that field. Judas bought the field. This is the blood money with which the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin bought it, was the money they gave to him. So it makes sense in a Jewish way of thinking to say Judas bought the field in which he died. I mean, I think Luke probably knows. I'm sure Luke knows the real story, and he
Mhm.
knows. I think he's read Matthew, and I think this is a kind of gloss on what Matthew reports. So yeah, it's kind of an ironic twist on it. Yeah, Judas bought that with the money that he betrayed Jesus with. He bought that place where he died.
The force of this text is taking over his place. So we're zooming in on the man who did the act. Um, and you have back in Matthew the chief priests refusing to take the money back. They don't put in the treasuries. I mean, they refuse to take it back. It's his money.
Right,
Now
right, exactly.
doesn't now become our possession.
No,
It remains your reward.
yeah. So it's actually really consistent with what with the Matthew version, and consistent in a way that uh, Luke points out the divine consequences that that fall on Judas,
Mm,
ironically, by without even meaning to, buying the field where he ends up
yeah.
falling wrong. Right.
Well, okay, so what's with the falling headlong and burst open in the
Yeah.
middle and all his bowels gushed out?
Luke kind of enjoys that. It seems like you're
Yeah.
really getting into the detail of telling his death.
Golly, dude. Chill.
Well, okay, so I think we, both can be true again, right? Um, so it's an actual contradiction if Luke were to say he didn't hang himself, but he fell down and his guts fell out. That would be a contradiction with Matthew.
Right.
Or if Matthew said, "Oh no, he didn't fall down and his guts fell out. He hung himself." Since there's not that negation, we can piece together this in such a way that both, of course, could happen. Judas can hang himself, and then at some point subsequent to that, either the rope snaps or the limb snaps or whatever, and he's had been hanging there for a day or two, or however long it takes to begin to bloat and rot, and then you fall headlong from the tree, and you're all that he says happens. The intestines fall out. This does sound. In fact, if you think about the falling headlong and bursting open, it sounds much more like what would happen to someone who's already a corpse
Mm,
than I don't know too many people who just fall down, even if they hit their heads really terribly or they injure themselves really badly. Their guts are just going to fall out. I, that suggests a body in a state of deterioration that doesn't cause much to rupture the the bloated skin.
right.
Not to be gross about it, but
Yeah. Yeah. And then with the field being called the field of blood, there's sort of uh, two ways in which that happens. Then you have the not right now, sweetie, not right now. Um, two reasons: the money, the blood money, and then now also the spilling of his blood in that field. And it would make sense that that story would circulate in
yeah,
both reasons for why it's called that would would circulate with it, right?
yeah. I mean, it it makes sense for the Sanhedrin to call it the field of blood, even before he hangs himself, or maybe it didn't. I'm not sure if we don't know the exact timing of the purchase and the and the hanging. We don't get the sequence of it all. Um, but it would also make sense that subsequent to the hanging, that name would take on new significance.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so that's a big one, actually.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have not. I didn't read the article you sent earlier, but I know that Bart Ehrman thinks that's the killer. That's a
He does. There's a pretty good debate between him and Peter Williams of Cambridge on Justin Brierly's show. Unbelievable. And Bart, he goes here to yes, suggest this is like an unreconcilable contradiction. And his and Peter, I mean, Peter's a great scholar, but he's not the best debater. But he gave some reasons for why that why this would be, and Bart Ehrman. he asks him. He says, um, when someone falls down after hanging themselves, where do they land, right? And the answer is, their feet. And so he finds it just implausible that he could fall headlong, and forgetting that there's a lot of factors, like the terrain, what tree, I mean, how far up in the tree is he? Are there other limbs? Like there's so many other factors, and then Barterman also suggests that there's we don't know of it happening to anybody, and and then you just want to ask, well, like, do we know all the
Have we done
circumstances in which
all the
people from the beginning of time have hung themselves and fallen? Have we done that study? I haven't seen it, but maybe it's out there. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. That's a really big one. The next one's a pretty big one too. That uh, historians like to go to. It's Luke 2, um, about the account of Jesus' birth. Um, And Luke writes, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. And he says in verse 2, this was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, the contradiction here, the problem is that we know from the story of Jesus' birth that Herod the Great is alive, and he dies in AD, not AD, sorry. Yeah, no, BC 4, right? 4 BC. Um, and we know that Quirinius becomes governor of Syria in 86. And so that's about, we're dealing with an issue here where Quirinius, at least supposed, can't be the governor of Syria. And so the conclusion that historians make is Luke is confusing this registration for a later registration that Quirinius, we do know Quirinius imposed, and when he was governor of Syria. So what's going on here? I mean, Quirinius wasn't governor, right?
right. There were several different ways to deal with this. The first is just the language itself. Um, and this is the one that I favor, although I think it's the minority view, but I think it makes the most sense. Is that word that is translated first is protos, which could be before. So what could be saying what could be what Luke could be saying is this is the registration before Quirinius was the governor of Syria, which would fit the timeline perfectly. That's I think it should be translated that way. Um, this is the before. This is the before registration. Um,
Right.
uh, so that's one way. Um, Another way to think about it is the word that's used for Quirinius's rule. Uh, doesn't It's kind of a general word. It doesn't mean that he was like the governor of Syria in an official way. It just means hegemon, like he has some kind of authority. And we know that he did have some kind of authority, and he was a commander, had some kind of military authority in Syria at the time before Herod died. He wasn't the chief governor, but he did have the kind of authority you might be expected to have if you were going to be overseeing a census or something of that nature. So it it either way you want to work that out. I it works both ways, but it's still one of those cases where you have uh, the only way to make this into a contradiction is by an error. I guess it's not really a contradiction; it's more of an error. The only way to make this into an error is to double down either on that word being translated first, or on the very general word for it's translated governor being uh, being the official title of the position rather than just a leader in a certain place.
What do you think of the theory that he had two governorships? That um,
Yep.
he did have a previous governorship there.
I've heard of that too. I haven't. Sorry, the dogs are just barking. Yeah, I've heard that too. I mean, and that's probably. I mean, I have not. Maybe my commentaries are too old, so I. So I know that new information is being dug up as we go on, but from my memory of the commentaries that I have, it's that he did have a military leadership role that was confirmed in Syria during that time. Maybe there's other information now that I'm not aware of that he was also governor. But either way, it works out
Yeah.
because again, the word is hegemon doesn't mean
Right.
being
The actual.
right guy in charge.
Yeah. No. I get that. This is where uh, you know, guys who will say that what we're doing right now is just like explaining away, an error whenever we should just just accept it as an error, right? That he just got it wrong. This is where I have a hard time with that because the in order to do that, everything has to be explained. So whether you are explaining the error in a positive way
Or negative.
or you're explaining it in a negative way, and you have to do just as much work to explain it in a negative way than you have to do in a positive way. And the question then is you have to weigh both of those explanations and see which is more probable. And when you explain it, let's just try to explain it the negative way. Luke just made an error. This is he's got, but then you have to ask, well, what's he thinking? Does he? Because we know as we read uh, the we know that as we read Luke, he gets a lot of details. He puts a lot of details in
Yeah,
there.
he does a lot of work.
There's a
Historical work.
lot of work, and this is the first place of two places in the birth narratives, or not in the birth narrative. Sorry, in the first few chapters, that he is very careful to place the life of Jesus within real history. So no, then you test uh uh where he is recording details in other places, and they check out. You have to, and you have this major problem. Like, this is something that, like, would be um uh like a really bad oversight by a guy like that. It doesn't fit in with his character when you're reading the text. You go to Acts chapter 5, and that's where most commentators think, he offhandedly mentions the census.
Right.
And you know, most commentators believe that, yeah, he's referring to that the census, right? That Quirinius um, uh, uh,
He knows
enacts
about that.
governor. He know. So here's the thing, though.
He knows it.
In just saying the census, that suggests that this is this is such common knowledge
Right.
to Luke and to everybody who he's writing to. So it's such common knowledge. It'd be absurd
Yeah.
for him to then like read that back into Luke chapter 2. It's like, man, did you that's ridiculous. That there's no way he made an error like that. That is way less plausible to me than perhaps he's saying something that we aren't we're not getting because we're not right there at that
Right.
time, and we might have some issues with the language.
Right. So the census back, you're right, because the registrations in those days were causes of a lot of political upheaval. I mean,
Yeah.
the Jews did not like being counted by the Romans, and and there was
What?
violent upheaval during the one that uh, Luke mentions in Acts chapter 5. So getting the date of that wrong or putting the wrong order is a little bit like thinking about, putting 9/11 in 2022 or something. So
Yeah.
it just this doesn't make sense. Everyone reading this had to know what he was talking about and not find it problematic.
Right.
Um, and so, but as to the question of like of explaining away and working out contradictions, this was the common line when I was in seminary that if you see something, if you see a difference, if you see a conflict, just accept it as a conflict and don't and accept that there's two different writers here writing about two different things, and of course they're going to get things wrong. That produced, in my view, the shallowest exegesis possible. You
Yeah.
don't if you don't try to work out the harmonization, if you don't try to see how can these texts possibly fit together, you're going to miss so much in both texts that could be brought out. A great example of this is James chapter 2 verse 24 and Romans chapter 3 verse 28, where Paul says, "Well, we're not a person is not saved a person is not justified by works of the law, but by faith, but not by works of the law." And then James says, "Oh no, a person is justified by works, not by faith alone." And that's a favorite passage our Roman Catholic friends love to go to. But even they will admit you've got those harmonized, and so much fruit has been born in the church by struggling with harmonizing those two texts. So much understanding of the two words for the word that's used there for justification in the way Paul is using it, in the way James is using it, employing different shades of the same word, and the different meanings of the word faith that we probably wouldn't ever be driven to understand and grasp had it not been for Christians recognizing the Bible doesn't contradict itself and having to work out the harmonization. Um, if you just leave it as a contradiction and go on, you're going to leave. You're going to be walking around in shallow waters.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And again, I think, the existence of an explanation doesn't mean that explanation is wrong. The like, and that's like how it's sort of looked at. It's like when someone brings up a contradiction, what they would call a contradiction, and you try to explain it. It's like, well, you're just explaining it away. You're coming up with things like, well, it's got
We're
to be
explaining it.
explained. Like, you, you can't just say, "Oh, it's just a contradiction." It's like, you, you have to talk about it. You got to explain it. And again, then the where the where the where the conversation should go is in weighing the explanation. And I think this kind of goes to that article that I sent you. The guy is a historian, and he writes at the end basically how the job of a historian is just to take the text by themselves and just read it. And if there's a contradiction, doesn't matter if it's from the Bible or from other ancient texts, if there's a contradiction, we say that it's contradiction. That's the job of a historian. And when you try to start now explaining it, you're now doing theology and you're doing apologetics. The issue with that, and from my point of view, is that uh, you're not actually you're not doing you're not understanding the text anymore when you strip it out of its context. When you strip it out of its framework and the way that it wants to be understood, you're not
Right.
understanding the text. Like you just, I mean, you can do this with anything. Like um, this analogy isn't perfect, but um, if you play the game of basketball, you're not allowed to run with the ball. You have to dribble the ball at all times when you have it, if you're going to move. But when you're doing a layup, you can't actually take two steps. You can run with the ball. Now, if I just strip those rules out and write them down and say, well, look, you can run with the ball, but you can't run with the ball. Which is it, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, no, you're not playing by the rules of the game. like you have to enter onto the court and understand this is the game of basketball and this is the rule. So it's not a contradiction. This is the rule. The I think what like when it comes to this claim that what you and I are doing right now is just you and I, we believe we start with it being God's word, so we have to try and make sense of these things. Um, the or maybe going back to the earlier example of God being just and loving, or merciful and all that. That's a paradox, or that's a contradiction, is would be called. It is a paradox, but it's not a contradiction. Um, the question isn't like, um, well, you can't take that and then in enforce your terms onto that, or your definitions onto justice
Yeah.
and mercy. You have to enter into the framework that of a God who is just and merciful, and then use the rules of that game and consider, is it consistent within itself? Is it
Yeah.
true that that God can be just and merciful? For instance, you can't do that with Islam. So when you go into Islam and you play by Islam's rules, and you understand that, okay, Allah says that he's just, it also says that he's forgiving, but his forgiveness
No
is
big.
not is just waiving a crime.
Right.
So that's not just even within its own
Right.
system. You go into those courts and you say these rules don't make sense within the game.
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's
Right.
inconsistent. It's in
Right.
they're contradictions. So that's an issue that I have with guys who wanna say that they're just doing history.
Yeah. And
No, you're not.
even historians who aren't studying the Bible don't do that. Right? Secular historians or historians of whether they're Christian or not, but historians who are studying um, any other field using primary source documents, they try to understand the document in a charitable way. Like they're before they just say, "Oh, this is a contradiction." They say, "Now, how would Tacitus mean this, and how does
Right.
that fit with what Tacitus wrote back here?" And they're going to try and work it out, assuming at first not that Tacitus is an error, an errant, but that Tacitus is not is a logical person who's not going to uh, make glaring errors without having who doesn't generally do that. So historians will read ancient primary source documents with a lot more charity and an attempt to understand the author than biblical historians do, because most of the biblical historians are coming in with an axe to grind. So and here's where that's problematic, because historians of certain ancient figures or events, um, not biblical ones, but other ones. They develop this kind of love for the person they're studying, Augustus Caesar or Julius Caesar or whatever. And so they're gonna notice the faults and the foibles, but they're gonna try and make the whole thing make sense. How they're gonna try and get into Julius Caesar's mind. How is he thinking about the Gallic Wars? How is he thinking about crossing the Rubicon? Is he really thinking he's a tyrant? What's he doing? They don't just say, "Oh well, he crossed the Rubicon. He broke the law. He's a tyrant." Let's go on, talk to the next thing. They don't do that, right? And
Yeah.
and when you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't do that either. If you hear if you're talking to somebody and you think they've insulted you, what do you do? Oh, I've been insulted. That's it. We're done. No, you say, well, did you really insult me there? What did you mean by that? Let me get into your head and try to understand what you were trying to communicate there. And so that's, I guess, from a critical point of view, someone could say, well, that's just because you're friends with that person. You're trying to make, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Where it's a, where you, so the same thing. We want to assume, even if the Bible were just a human book, which it's not, we would still want to have the same kind of charitable reading of it until we were forced to not to just say, okay, well, this is actually doesn't work. Even if it were just a purely human book, but that they don't. But the people who are studying the scriptures, like Bart Ehrman, don't even give it that. They come in as enemies, ready to take every opportunity they can to find fault. And so when we, as knowing the author and loving the author, come to the text and say, well, you need to give the Holy Spirit a little more credit than you're doing, and even the human authors that he inspired to put these things down. You need to have a little more charity in your reading of this. And if you do have that charity in your heart, then sure enough, things begin to work themselves out in ways that they don't if you hate God.
Yeah. And, I've yet to have a supposed, contradiction or inconsistency laid out before me that hasn't with a like a 10 to 15-minute good faith reading
Yeah,
work itself out. Like it's not even like I've had to um go to like the scholars to figure out what's going on here.
right.
Just give it like you just take some time, 20 minutes to just open up your English Bible and read the supposed inconsistencies and just with good faith, knowing like, okay, even if you're not a Christian, like, okay, I'm just going to assume that these people are not stupid, um, because I mean that doesn't fit in with the writings themselves anyway. They clearly were not stupid. Um, so okay, these people weren't stupid. What's going on here? And just ask questions of the text. I've yet to find one that's like, I can't fit. I
Yeah,
just I don't see where how you I could get around it. I mean, it, so and again, like you said, there's all everybody has an axe to grind, and there is no such thing as neutrality. Nobody comes to the text without presuppositions upon it. I mean, like the person like Barter, anybody else, a skeptic already thinks it's just a human book. There's
right.
like that's already what it is. So clearly there are inconsistencies and contradictions. And then yeah, we as clergy we go to it and we believe that it's God's word. And yet the question then is that's fine. Both can come at it with their presuppositions as long as we're aware that that's going on. Um, which worldview though is consistent with the reality then? Like let's read it in the lens of the skeptic, and then let's read it in the lens of the faithful, and see which lens makes more sense of
Yeah.
the text, and actually is more plausible when it comes to like has more plausible explanations to these contradictions.
Right. Right. Well, and since the skeptic just tends to just give a very shallow reading of a text and say it's a contradiction, the clearly the people who care about the text and who do the work of investigating these texts and doing the exegesis are going to have the sounder and more solid reasoning behind it. Like in my experience, the people who love Bart Ehrman are the people who they are not students of the Bible themselves. They don't study the Bible themselves. They study Bart Ehrman and they read Bart Ehrman's take in the Bible and they regurgitate Bart Ehrman's take in the Bible, and they don't know. So you show someone who's been, and I've done this before with someone who now is a believer. Thank goodness it wasn't because not by virtue of what I said, but person ultimately became a believer. Um, but but I took this person through some of the texts that he was talking about, that Bart Ehrman was talking about, and I could tell by the way he was describing them that he hadn't actually read them himself. He was just trying to remember exactly what Bart Ehrman said about them. So, so we
You
go
gotta
to
be
them and I'm
careful. You gotta be careful, man. And Bart Ehrman is sly, dude.
yeah,
He yeah, he's a very serious biblical scholar. But when he gets into writing all of his popular books, man,
yeah,
he does not actually show that he says that he's showing the scholarship to people. He's not. He's not showing the scholarship to people. When he says things like there are what is it more errors in the Bible than there are words, right? It's like
yeah.
okay, you know better than to say that. And
Yeah,
uh,
did you watch Wes Huff's takedown of that? Um,
mm-mm.
if you've heard
I
that,
like Wes Huff. He's great.
yeah, he takes down that claim pretty quick. Like a 5 minute little video, and he just does away with it in 2 seconds.
Yeah. No, Wes Huff is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah. He's going on so many podcasts. He'll probably come on Grammar Fellows. I'm
we should get him on. We should get him
we'll
on.
get Wes Huff on here. And then have him do some takedowns of Barterman for us. Okay, well, we should end it, but we should end it with the question that I started the podcast with, because you never answered it. And
Ah,
it's probably because of it's probably a
too
contradiction
hard.
you can't figure out. Um, how many women and angels were at the tomb?
Yeah, this is one of the most easiest ones to answer because it goes to the heart again of what is the definition of a contradiction. Mark only gives us the account of one angel um, inside the tomb, but he doesn't say there was only one angel and one only and not two. He just refers to the women seeing an angel in the tomb. Uh, John and Luke uh, mention two, and so, but they don't say there was. They don't say there wasn't only just one. There were two. So because they're not the negating word, they're not in conflict. Mark refers to the angel who speaks. There was an angel there who spoke, and it was if there was a second angel there, or since there was a second angel there, there was, but that doesn't take away from the truth of what Mark has said. There was an angel there who spoke. Does he have to mention the second angel in order not to, in order uh, to be truthful? No, he's being truthful. I don't. If I see a crowd of people and uh, someone yells at me out of the crowd, and I say, "Yeah, I was walking on the street and this guy yelled at me," and then you tell the same story and you say, "Yeah, we were walking on the street. And there's a whole crowd of people, and then one guy yelled at Matt." We're not contradicting each other. We're just focusing on a different aspect of the thing. Um, the one example I think I've heard it used, and I've used it myself as well, is if you have a if four people see a car accident and one person says, "Well, a yellow car hit a tree," and the other person says, "Well, a 1987 Toyota hit a tree," and the other person says, "A car with three people in it hit a tree," and the other person says, "A car with a New York State license plate hit a tree." The Bart Ehrmans of the world would come away and say, "Look, they're just all contradicting themselves." But actually, no, those can all four of those can be true um, at the same time because they can all be just describing different aspects of the event. And that's what you have with all the resurrection accounts.
Yep,
That's why I think Matthew mentions three women, and Luke
yep,
says there's a whole bunch of women. Yeah, well,
yep.
yeah, there were a whole bunch of women. Matthew mentions three.
I think that's the key for myself. It was the women, the
Mhm.
amount of women that was the key for me, and the number of angels. Because if you have a lot of women, you have at least
These three.
5, 6. Because if you count the different names that he
Yeah,
left, and so probably more. Um, and you have them seeing an angel outside the tomb. You have them seeing the angel in the tomb. But I just think it's pretty clear. Like if you have a group of women going to a tomb and it's open, and Jesus probably going to be some who stay outside, others who go inside.
yeah,
There's gonna like you're gonna have the different perspectives, and angels, right? They are angels, so they don't have flesh, and so one can appear in the tomb and then reappear outside of the tomb with the other.
right,
So it's just like again. This is like playing by the rules of an account where angels are involved. And it's like
right, right.
play by the rules, and there's no inconsistency here. There's no contradiction, right? Um, yeah. Well, good. Thank you, Matt. I was having a tough time with that one, so I, I crisis of faith over here. But no, I joke about that, but I know that the supposed contradictions are a faith issue for a lot of people, and a lot of Christians will hear uh, people just spit out all tons of well, either they'll spit out the contradictions themselves, or just a general statement, oh, the Bible is riddled with contradictions. And I hope that just a small handful here, which and these are huge ones. The like Abiathar one, uh, Bart says that was the first one that led him down his deconstruction. So,
No,
um,
he was already deconstructing before he
well, he grew up in the Episcopal Church, so,
yeah, right,
um,
okay.
but but I know that for any Christians listening to this who have had trouble with that, I would just say um, there uh, there are no alleged contradictions or inconsistencies that you can't go and read for yourself and come and see that there are very good plausible explanations for these things. And not only that, but they've actually been dealt with for quite some time.
Yeah.
These are not new. um, and what?
There were, I mean, the Augustine, I think, I forgot who it was before him, but the fathers worked out
Yes,
harmonizations of the Gospels in which they included every verse of the Gospels
right.
and tried to write a whole
It's
story.
like news to them that the
Yeah,
gospel had
yeah,
differences, right? So just let that be an encouragement if it is something that you're struggling with. And hey, if there is if there is something like an inconsistency, if you're listening to this and there's an inconsistency that you just have not been able to wrap your mind around and you're really struggling with, send it to us. You can email us at kramerfellowship@gmail.com. Send it to us and we'd love to maybe talk about it on the podcast. But yeah, just read your Bible and work, and then ask your pastor, and work it out. So, all right, great. Thanks, Matt, for working these
thank
out
you. It's fun.
for us. And yeah, great. Should have a whole series on just contradictions. Just
Yeah.
go through all of them. Uh, but okay, well, with that said, thanks for listening. If you're joining us live, thanks for uh, joining us. And if you're listening to it later, thanks for listening. And Lord willing, we will be back with you next week. I'll see you, Matt. Have a great night.
You too.